We started small. We started turning on free public Wi-Fi outside of any location that Land O'Lakes owned or managed. So our plants in rural places, our warehouses in rural places. And we saw people driving up and sitting in the parking lot and doing Zoom school with their kids, like on day one. A mom sitting in a minivan with 4 kids of different ages doing homeschool outside of a plant we have in central Minnesota. That gives me goosebumps to think about that.
Welcome to Consensus in Conversation. I'm your host, Connor Gaughan. Today, I'm talking with Tina May, Vice President of Rural Services and Chief of Staff to the CEO at Land O'Lakes. Land O'Lakes is one of America's leading agriculture and food companies. You've no doubt seen their products, like butter, while shopping for groceries. After an impressive tenure in public service with the U.S. Senate and the USDA, where she was a big part of helping get 2 bipartisan farm bills passed, Tina has brought her brilliance and business creativity to Land O'Lakes, where, among so many great initiatives, she is helping to develop the American Connection Corps. Tina's career has given her great insights on the agriculture industry, the intersection between the public and private sector, and how certain policies and companies can work together to do better for American communities, particularly in our heartland. I'm so excited to get you on the podcast to talk. I think there's so much fun that you have in your career and so many insights and so much cool stuff you're doing, Land O'Lakes is doing. So thank you for taking the time today.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So let's start at the very beginning. Tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're from.
Yeah, I am from a family farm in north central Iowa. My folks are still there on the farm. We raise cattle and had a number of other things happening on the side, like a lot of diversified farmers do and did back in the 80s and 90s. We're close to the farm. We're not that far here at Land O'Lakes, so I get down there every chance I can.
So speaking of getting out to the farm, I think that most Americans who live in big cities or suburbs may not have the most accurate picture of life beyond our own bubbles. And I'm curious, as someone who spends a lot of time in all types of American communities, what do you think the biggest misconceptions around rural America are?
Yeah, good question. I think this could be a separate podcast just in itself. I think a lot of times it is my experience that some may have this perception that rural is less than, or that people wanted to leave or get out or choose something else, but couldn't. And I think that's really wrong. I think rural is something you choose. Rural is a place you want to be, and rural is a lifestyle to aspire to. And the older I get, I actually think that is more true, right? That people aspire to that and to be in that place. I grew up at the end of a dead-end road, and this road used to be a stagecoach path. Right? It is nothing, right? When the picture you have in your mind is exactly what it looks like. But I think there's something that driving past a dead-end sign every day does to your psyche. And I'm a first-generation college graduate, and no one ever expected anything of me. So I think the fact that you could come from that place and you could show up and compete with folks that maybe went to a high school that had more opportunities or proximity to more cultural activities or things like that. I don't know. It sort of puts this chip on your shoulder and you're like, watch me now. I can do this too. I can compete with you.
So where did you study?
I went to undergrad at the University of Minnesota.
Excellent. What was your major?
I studied agriculture and German.
Awesome. We've been interviewing and recording with all sorts of folks with lots of cool jobs, from Navy SEALs to physicists, but I think you may be my first grain merchandiser and logistics coordinator. Could you give us a bit of your career path?
Yeah, physicist, dang. Well, I'm not that. I will tell you, I went to the University of Minnesota because I wanted to run away from the farm. I wanted nothing to do with agriculture at all. And it wasn't until I was probably about halfway through that I thought, oh my gosh, agriculture is so much more than herding cows, right?
Yeah.
Waking up early to feed cows or milk cows and bills to pay, right? There's such a wide world. And it wasn't until I was exposed to that I thought, oh my gosh, I love agriculture. I love rural America. I could make this my career.
Yeah.
And I called home, right? This is in the days of landlines. And my dad answered on the phone in the barn. And we had baby cows. Baby cows are really loud when they're hungry and bellowing. He gives me this, what? What do you want? I said, Dad, I declared my major today. And he's like, what does that mean? What is that? And I told him, I'm going to study agriculture and German. And he said, you want to be a German farmer like me? He said, why couldn't you have been a teacher or a nurse? He's still, I swear he's still mad about it to this day. He was so disappointed. But my first job after college, I worked for a grain trading firm called the Schooler Company. They're headquartered in Omaha, Nebraska. And this was when there was an active grain exchange here in Minneapolis. And we were there on the grain exchange. I was on the corn desk, on the corn team, so I was selling futures on the Chicago Board of Trade.
Yep.
It was fun. It was a great first job out of college.
Yeah. I want to stop and talk about the USDA for a while. So how did you get from there to the USDA? Give us some of the highlights along the way.
Yeah. I loved that job. It felt like a job, trading grain. It felt like a job I thought I'd never have the opportunity to get. So I was really grateful for it. But along the way, I learned... at the time, I thought I liked the wrong things about the job, right? I loved when USDA would drop a WASDE, right? A World Ag Supply and Demand Estimate, right? And those periods of time that are big moments for grain traders, things that move markets. Yeah. I wanted to know more about policy and politics around agriculture. And I thought the only way to do that would be to quit and move to DC. So that's exactly what I did.
Yeah, which I think probably motivates quite a few 20-somethings to move to DC. For those who don't live here like I do, the city is populated with a youthful energy that I find generally pretty inspiring because it's so hopeful and optimistic and energizing. These are people that come to DC to try to make the world a better place in whatever area of policy or politics they care about. And regardless of political affiliation, it's just super inspiring to me. I think.
Yeah. And the energy in the city and on Capitol Hill, there's nothing like it.
Yeah. You've had a ton of interesting jobs in Washington, D.C., had a pretty important role at USDA, and it's an agency that I think impacts all Americans in really profound ways, but I don't think it's that well understood by most Americans. And so I'm wondering how you would help connect the dots for the average family that, what the USDA is, and especially what it is relative to their day-to-day lives.
Yeah, good question. The USDA is enormous. It has 100,000 employees. Yeah. It has 29 agencies and 8 mission areas. It was started in the mid-1800s after President Lincoln signed a bill into law starting the department. At the time that USDA was started, half of Americans lived on farms. Yeah. Right? So just to put that into context. And now today, 1% of Americans farm. Right? So, wow, quite the shift. USDA does impact every family every day, like you mentioned, Connor. A lot of it, though, is very quiet and behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. If you think about food safety, food inspections, right? Ensuring that the food that you eat is safe to consume, right? That's USDA. But USDA plays a huge role in climate change and being proactive, working every day with farmers and ranchers, providing technical assistance and expertise, providing safety net programs for farmers and ranchers. So it's a lot.
In one other particular period in your time in D.C., I know you were heavily involved in passage of the Farm Bill, which is something that's getting a lot of press right now. And also, having myself lived here a while, I know that when something like that gets done, the stories from the trenches are pretty awesome. And so I'm curious, give us some of your your favorite stories from how y'all got that done, because it's unique in that it required everybody to kind of come on board. And so you had to work in a bipartisan manner to get there.
Yep. The farm bill that Congress is working on right now, it expires at the end of September of this year, 2023. The farm bill is written in 5-year cycles, so it comes due every 5 years.
Yeah.
And the farm bill itself, at the end of the day, is a massive piece of legislation, right? When you look at it, when it's printed after it's done, it's 1,000 pages long, right? The 2014 Farm Bill had over 600 individual decision points that USDA needed to work through and get out the door during implementation.
Wow.
So I worked on 2 different farm bills, both for the Senate Agriculture Committee, what became the 2008 Farm Bill, and then what became the 2014 Farm Bill. It is one of the best things I've ever been a part of. Both of those teams were incredible. But you said something really important, and that's the bipartisan nature of those bills. I think the agriculture committees, they really do still tend to be incredibly bipartisan.
Yeah. So we'll move it into the Land O'Lakes land. Let's talk about the company itself a little bit, though. So 2020, from what I read, Land O'Lakes produced and sold around 300 million pounds of butter. It's a lot of butter.
A lot of butter.
But beyond that, give us a sense of the company and the scale of its operations and the scope of it as an organization.
Sure, my pleasure. Land O'Lakes is a Fortune 200 farmer-owned cooperative, right? So fundamentally, what that means is the farmers own us, right? The dairy farmers, and also the local farmer-owned cooperatives through our ag retail network, Winfield United, they own us. So whenever we make money, we turn around and we pay dividends or patronage to those farmers that own us.
Yeah.
So at its basic level, if you want to talk about rural wealth creation, the cooperative business model is the way to do it.
Yeah.
Keeping money in those rural communities, right? Keeping the wealth in the towns, on the farms where it is generated for that dollar to turn around and stay invested in that community.
Yeah. Why do you think that model is so unique to agriculture? Because you don't see it a ton of other places.
Because I think farmers are smart, and I think they want to hold the value and the wealth on their own farm in their own pocketbook. And I think this business model is a way to do that.
Yeah. One of the other stats I read is that last year, Land O'Lakes had 237,000 tons of carbon sequestered, which added, if I'm not mistaken, around 4.5 million into farmers' pocketbooks. So talk to us about sustainability broadly in agriculture and how you guys view it at Land O'Lakes.
Yes. Okay. So when I came to Land O'Lakes about 7 years ago, I came to help start our sustainability team. At the time, the task was to help farmers save money or make money through sustainability. And what you just said, Connor, that stat, holy smokes. That is what that team has done in 7 years, right? They have returned over $4 million directly to farmers through their on-farm management practices or their conservation activities, climate smart ag, regenerative ag. There's a lot of ways to define this today, right? But at the end of the day, it's through the ingenuity and the work ethic of farmers and the ability to put one foot in front of the other and try something new. And that is not easy all the time when you've got a farm that you figured out how to get yield, how to best manage your land, right? How to deal with all of the headwinds coming your way. So for those farmers to take a risk to try something different or try something new to be more efficient in their operations, I think that should just tell you that American agriculture is in great hands. I think this next generation of farmers totally are brilliant.
Yeah. So Land O'Lakes in particular has done some really inspiring stuff, particularly under your leadership on the sustainability team. And I want to talk about those initiatives a little bit. Let's start with one of the biggest and coolest projects, the American Connection Corps.
Yeah. Okay. I will say this was during COVID. This was 2020, the very beginning of the pandemic, like right away, the first day. Our CEO said, rural areas are going to get hit harder because they are already underserved, right? The hospitals are understaffed if they have a hospital. We knew the statistics about rural hospitals shutting down. But more so, we knew that rural America was woefully underconnected, and they had big pockets where they weren't connected at all to high-speed broadband internet. So we got busy really quick thinking through what we could do about that right away. We started small. We started turning on free public Wi-Fi outside of any location that Land O'Lakes owned or managed. So our plants in rural places, our warehouses in rural places. And we saw people driving up and sitting in the parking lot and doing Zoom school with their kids like on day one, right? Like a mom sitting in a minivan with 4 kids of different ages doing homeschool outside of a plant we have in central Minnesota. Right? That gives me goosebumps to think about that. What happened next was we started calling others. We just started cold calling partners, folks we worked with, folks we knew, and that was done at the highest levels of our organization. And we pulled together a group that we dubbed the American Connection Project. And we had 5 organizations that jumped in with us right away. The Mayo Clinic, right? And their need was for connectivity for their rural hospitals and clinics and their patients to connect into their hubs. And we pulled together a coalition to advocate for a robust investment in broadband infrastructure. And that then turned into the $65 billion that you see in the bipartisan infrastructure bill that was signed into law last year.
Yeah.
Right. So we ended up with 176 organizations jumping in and joining that effort. And I think the coalition part is really important because we all collectively pushed in different ways. You know, Mayo Clinic could come with us to an ag committee meeting, right? Or we could go with someone from the financial services industry to the banking committee to talk about this importance. It really hit all aspects of the economy. But then something happened. I was on the phone with someone and we were talking about, this was before the bipartisan infrastructure bill passed, and we were talking about how the money would be implemented, right? So we were thinking like 6 steps ahead, how the money would be implemented, how we would ensure this funding would go towards unconnected and underconnected communities, urban and rural. And this person on the phone said, well, what do you mean? What do you mean rural communities don't have a grant writer at City Hall? What do you mean rural communities have a volunteer mayor, right? Like they were like, no way. They were laughing. It was like a cartoon anvil was dumped on my head because it was, we are overlooking the main problem here, right? We are just like blowing right past it. We are making this too complicated where we need to think through ways we can help these communities that we knew were already last on the list to receive help, how we could help them stick their proverbial hand in the air and say, hey, no, over here, don't forget about me. So some very smart person was talking with me about contemplation, right? And like using, like very basically using your imagination to put yourself in a situation and use your 5 senses. Like just do it right now, right? To think about what that is like and what the steps you need to take to problem solve against that, right? It's just very basic. Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh my gosh, we need to put bodies in these communities. How are we going to do this, right? These people, there's no grant writer in Stacyville, Iowa, right? There's nobody in the county that's getting paid to write a grant, let alone build a stakeholder team in the county to bring everybody together to go apply for these funds. So this is where this idea of the American Connection Corps came from. The thought was, let's take folks who are wanting to move back to their rural hometowns or are currently in their rural hometowns that have a penchant for public service. Let's give them a 2-year fellowship. Let's teach them how to do fundamental community organizing, and let's give them the tools they need to do the grant writing, to bring people together, right? Let's give them the Rolodex they need to call folks when they get stuck and solve these problems. That is what the American Connection Corps is today.
Yeah. Imagine implicit in there also, let's give them a community to be a part of that's all working through this together. It's beyond the Rolodex to troubleshoot, just to have a peer in a comparable community in another state thinking about the same things. That fellowship in the sense of fraternal fellowship probably makes a ton of difference for these folks.
Yeah, so it's a cohort model. There's a lot of focus on people, place, and possibility is how we like to frame it. There are 75 of these fellows to date, right? So this program will hit its 2-year mark this August.
Congratulations.
All fellows have AmeriCorps status, which feels really good because with AmeriCorps status comes certain advantages, including an education stipend at the end of the fellowship. And it just comes with a certain resume builder to say you were an AmeriCorps fellow. But more so, I think these American Connection Corps fellows are, I think, the best thing in public service today. I am so proud of especially this first cohort saying yes and jumping in and moving to these communities. And I think when you start to unlock problems, it gives you other problems to solve. Yeah. And I think that's a really good thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've had a lot of success. These fellows have had a lot of success. The grant writing work, the flywheel is turning. These fellows have applied for 88 grants, representing over $50 million. I like to think about it as, these are communities that probably wouldn't have seen any of that work. And a lot of times in rural communities, when you start talking about numbers and volumes, it's a slippery slope because it's rural for a reason. There's not a lot of volume, right? There's not when you talk about households or people served, it's a tricky statistic to use. But when you start talking about Gage County, Nebraska, and one of the fellows is solely responsible for connecting 1,000 households to the internet that never have had it before.
Right. That's
an entire town. That's 2 entire towns, 3 entire towns, right? That's an entire corner of the county where kids didn't go to school during the pandemic, where grandma couldn't log on and check a basketball score of their high school kids, and unlocking all of the other work potential.
You've told me in the past one in particular, of your success stories that you're most excited about, but I'm curious if you have any success stories from your fellows that you'd want to pass along today. Any favorites that you think are worth trumpeting?
Yeah, it's hard to pick favorites, but well, and I will say, right, it's everyone, all of these fellows, they're all working so hard and doing their best in the communities in which they serve, right? Yeah. So they're all doing great work for and with the community. We had a fellow in rural Ohio who ended up building what became an app that allowed others, not just in her community or the county, but nationwide, to access the Affordable Connectivity Program. That's part of the funding that was in that bipartisan infrastructure bill to decrease your monthly internet bills.
Yeah.
There was a fellow here in Minnesota who was working to build the Rosetta Stone for his tribal language here in northern Minnesota. And in doing this work, he discovered that in order to keep his tribal elders safe at the very beginning of the pandemic, he first needed to solve the problem of connectivity so he could safely communicate with his tribal elders and keep them healthy and safe. So he became a fellow to first focus on how do I bring reliable, affordable connectivity to the whole tribe.
Yeah.
And I personally had a lot of learnings from him, and he taught me a lot about tribal government, and how you need to think more holistically when it comes to their governments and their structure. He was successful in bringing connectivity to his region, but then he went on to focus on this language project, right? Yeah. And it's the use case, really, right? It's how you use this infrastructure as a tool. I think in that particular case, it's pretty profound in the historical, cultural, and importance of heritage within these communities.
Well, I mean, it actually highlights something we haven't even covered, which is simply the importance of tribal cultures in America, and they fall into the rural American landscape. And so, talk about being underserved, but also underappreciated. It's not, it's not always front of mind. I know Land O'Lakes has quite a few other really awesome and important initiatives and projects that kind of fall under the sustainability lens, focused on a variety of things. I'm wondering if you could tell us about some of the ones that you're working on right now, or some of the ones that you're most excited about coming up.
Yeah. Our sustainability team falls under our Truterra arm of Land O'Lakes. And that team works with farmers every day and our farmer cooperative members. So there's a couple things going on, and Connor, I'll try to be succinct here, but there's one pretty cool project I'll mention. We have a number of dairy farmers out in the state of California that, due to increasing regulation on methane emissions, there was some grant funding available to them to install methane digesters on their farms. And one of the things we helped our farmers think through was, how do you take methane gas that's coming off an on-farm dairy digester? How do you turn that into renewable compressed natural gas, inject that into a natural gas pipeline, and send it to LA to fuel a fleet of city buses? That project is happening today.
That's amazing.
It just highlights how cool farmers are, I think. And one thing I do want to mention is the technology that farmers need on their farm to do climate practices like the one I just mentioned. They require connectivity. They require broadband connectivity. You need to be able to connect to Wi-Fi and send your data to the cloud in order to be able to even think about installing these practices on your farms, right? It is fundamental to every conversation we have about on-farm technology.
But also just wow, right? Like the amount of creativity required to even think about that as a possible flow of product or byproduct. Who came up with that?
Yeah, ag is awesome, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
So I tend to leave the last few minutes to talk about the big picture. Things like agriculture and food security, things like climate change. These are giant societal-wide topics. They involve every stakeholder group you could possibly imagine. And sometimes the negativity is just overwhelming. I mean, I remember, was it yesterday or 2 days ago, the IPCC report comes out, and I mean, talk about gloom and doom. And it feels like we're working across every sector in America to make inroads, and then we get the headline. And it's defeating. It's hard. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious how you stay inspired. How do you defeat defeatism?
Good question. We sometimes say to each other here in the office, if not us, who? If not now, when?
Yeah.
I know that framing can be overused. But one of our partners in the American Connection Project, I think, said it best. And he said, a lot of folks will put duct tape on a structural problem versus going to fix the structural problem. And I think certainly in my own background, growing up on the farm, if there's a problem and you live on a dead-end gravel road, right? You're not running into town to get a part to fix everything. You're going to run out to the machine shed and you're going to see what's in the drawer, right? Or what's in the toolbox. And you're going to figure out a way to perhaps duct tape the problem while you build a plan to fix the rest. And I think that's just agriculture. I think that's just farming. I think that's just our industry, to make do with what you've got until you can fix the rest. But one of the things I just love so much about working for a farmer-owned cooperative is the ability to take that longer view, to say, okay, we'll put some duct tape on this problem for today, but tomorrow we are going to get busy with that structural change that's needed, because we have the ability, sitting in these rooms with the farmers that own us, to take the longer view, because they are going to pass these farms to their kids and their family, and we're able to take that generational view and that longer term mindset to fix these problems today.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I'm not even sure it's a metaphor, because it actually is real, you know, but how much we could all learn from that. Like, let's duct tape it, and, you know, we'll get into town tomorrow to get the part, or the next day, but like, let's do what we can when we can do it, and let's keep an eye on the long game, and that's all you can do.
Yeah. I think too, Connor, you know, there's only so much time. We only have so much time, where when you think about what are the vehicles to make that structural change happen, well, in agriculture, more often than not, it's looking at a farm bill, right? It's how can we think about a policy change?
Yeah.
And like I mentioned, that happens in those 5-year increments, right? So if we're thinking about systemic change, we got to get busy today, right? Because that next farm bill cycle is 5 years away. And we've got a lot of stakeholder engagement to get done ahead of that if we want that change to stick. Yeah.
Do you, in general, find ag, the people, the community, optimistic?
I think you have to be. I think you really do have to be to work in agriculture.
Yeah.
And to be as close to farmers as we are here at the cooperative.
Yeah. It's such a, I keep saying important, but that's not even the right word, or it's the heart.
Oh, yeah. I love that you said that. No, it is really, you got to love it. And it's in your bones.
Yeah.
It's when I talked about caring, you know, the community that surrounds these farmers, right? These farmers that are the community, these rural communities, these small towns that we all love so much, whether you're just driving through one, whether you're scrolling Instagram and you're loving that main street. We all have a responsibility, I believe, to do what we can, right? To care for these communities.
Love for folks to learn more about the American Connection Corps. Where should we send folks?
You can check us out at AmericanConnectionProject.com, and you can find our work on the American Connection Corps there. If you'd like to apply to be an American Connection Corps Fellow, please check that out as well. We are walking into a recruiting cycle now for the fall, but check out Land O'Lakes too on LinkedIn.
Thank you so much, Tina. It was such a fun conversation. And everyone knows where to find Land O'Lakes and the 300 million pounds of butter every year. That's everywhere. We get to see it all the time. Thank you so much, Tina, for the great conversation. Consensus in Conversation is hosted by me, Connor Gaughan. The episode is produced by Will Gatchell and Chandler Bramstead. Executive produced by me with editing from Reasonable Volume. Special thanks to Consensus Creative Director Kate Tucker and our strategist Patrick Gallagher. Don't forget to like and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. We'll see you next week.